Bryan Shaffer. You're here in Dubai to do something a little bit different than some of the other people who are here at the Cityscape conference. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm with a company called Special Asset Solutions. We set up funds that buy distressed properties primarily in the United States. And why I came to Cityscape Dubai is I'm a partner in the Distressed Asset Coalition. And what we do is we help investors around the world get the word out about their properties, their assets they're selling, the assets they're buying, help them structure their funds. So here at Cityscape Dubai, we're setting up a specific program where investors can come and present their properties to the Middle Eastern investment community.
Okay. What sort of properties? I mean, what kind of properties are you looking at?
It's really a range, and many companies have different type of assets. In the United States right now, the main distressed assets are on the residential side. Commercial properties are in distress, but they haven't been selling. There's still a big gap between what owners think they should be worth and what people are actually willing to pay. On the residential market side, the banks have so many assets now that they are starting to sell. It's hard. What we do is we buy large portfolios, so it's very hard to find those portfolios. And people that have asked to speak at the Cityscape conference have really been from a variety of different companies. Several companies setting up funds to acquire commercial properties throughout the world. Companies like Hines that recently announced that they're going to acquire $1 billion worth of properties here in Dubai. Companies in the U.S. that are doing large portfolios of commercial properties.
What's the interest level from Middle East investors, as far as you can tell so far?
Before coming to the conference, we spoke with many investors. There's a definite interest level. That the question is always price and timing. And so, like I said, everybody wants, they read in the paper that you can buy properties at 20 cents on the dollar. And that's not really true. That, you can buy them at 20 cents on the dollar, but that's using the values from 2007, not today's values. You're going to typically pay for residential properties in the United States about 65 cents on the dollar of current value. And there's still very great opportunities for companies to buy, but it takes cash and moving quick. And that's the hardest thing for international investors, is jumping into a new market and moving fast. It's funny, when the market was very high, companies went out and invested very quickly and swiftly. They ran to get assets. Now the market's very poor, and it's really a good buying opportunity. And we've seen from past cycles, I used to work for the Resolution Trust Corporation in the U.S. that helped resolve distressed properties in the 1990s. And we found that people that bought in that era were the most profitable companies in 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007. And so it's funny now that companies are still very hesitant to jump into the marketplace, even though history would tell us that the companies that jump in now will do the best in the future.
It says something, doesn't it, about the herd mentality? It's always...
Yeah. Definitely. And I talk to companies. I'll say, like, well, in 2007, you paid, $2,000 per square foot for this building. Today, you can buy it for $1,000 a square foot. Why wouldn't you jump that opportunity? And part of it, though, is then they were using 90% leverage. They weren't putting any of their own money into a deal. And today, they have to put in their own money, and they need to have access to large amounts of money to buy quickly.
That's a good point. Is there money to be borrowed in the U.S. for buying, for non-Americans to be buying distressed properties in the U.S.?
That's an interesting question. I ran into several people. There's one of the speakers that's going to be at the Distressed Asset Coalition and speaking at Cityscape is setting up a fund geared for international investors wanting to invest in U.S. distressed properties. We haven't seen that many lending institutions stepping up yet. We think that there will be funds set up. We've watched in the U.S. fund after fund after fund announce. In the last few weeks, Sam Zell, famous real estate investor, announced, I think, around a $450 million fund to buy distressed. What they're buying is actually distressed CMBS loans, the commercial mortgage-backed security loans. And what they're going to try and do, and what we see the big trend is there's been about 10 to 15 companies set up in that little region, is that will probably be the biggest bulk sales of commercial real estate, we think, through those CMBS portfolios, because they're very complicated. they're very hard to buy in small pieces. So companies with big funds could come in and acquire the entire fund. And we think companies like that will eventually start lending to investors from throughout the world. But the typical investment mediums like banks are not lending on commercial real estate today.
Right. What's the, I know that American investors looking around the world tend to complain about legal regimes that make it difficult to do X, Y, and Z in various countries.
Right.
What's it like in the U.S. for a non-American to be buying distressed property in mass or even in small units?
In general, there's very few limitations. I mean, there are some tax differences for international investors, but in the U.S., it's a pretty open marketplace. Now, we're a little worried that might change a little bit because the Chinese government and some large Chinese investors have expressed a strong interest in U.S. real estate. And it looks like most of that will be through American funds because there is a sort of a political uneasiness if a foreign investor comes in and buys huge chunks of properties in the U.S. But it's much more in the U.S. from a public relations standpoint than a hard law standpoint. There's no real restrictions on foreign investors in the U.S.
I remember a few years ago when the Japanese were buying major American buildings
right.
and Rockefeller Center, things like that, and there was a lot of sort of, as you say, public relations outcry.
Right, and I actually worked for Mitsui for 7 years. So I spent 7 years with one of Japan's, two largest real estate investors, and it was a learning experience through that cycle. Because the Japanese strategy was to come in, acquire, and say, we now own Rockefeller Center, we now own this building, and subsequent to that, and even the Japanese investors have started going to much more of a partnership structure, where now they'll partner with, BlackRock, Blackstone, one of the major international investment funds. It's become a lot more common. It takes away the direct risk and sort of mediates the risk involvement, but also at least even if you own 90% of a fund with BlackRock, it's not a foreign company coming in and taking over, so it looks better.